Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be discussing the classic Call of Cthulhu scenario, Fear of Flying. Written by Marcus Rowland and published in 1992's Fearful Passages, a collection that I've reviewed several adventures from before. With this collection, each of the 10 scenarios focuses on some sort of vehicle, be it armored cars, airships, trains, boats. Fear of Flying is about airplanes.
Holy crap, are we finally doing an airplane adventure, or are you just screwing with me again?
How do you mean?
I mean that I've said for years that I've wanted an adventure that takes place aboard an airplane. And I thought we were going to get that when we did Dissociation, but we didn't. And then I thought we were going to get that when we did Marooned on Marduk, and we still didn't get that. So are we finally going to get what I've been asking for?
Yes.
Finally, yes! Is it snakes? Please tell me it's snakes aboard the airplane.
Can't tell you that till after the spoiler warning. Anyway, this scenario is 13 pages long. However, the first 3 pages of it are really all about airplanes of the 1920s, and specifically the Tabor aerial yacht, which isn't a real airplane, but it is modeled after the Tarrant Tabor, which was a real airplane. The Tabor was a triplane with 6 engines, 4 facing the front and 2 facing the rear. It also had an open cockpit, which is kind of weird when you look at it from the modern standpoint. Also, the real Tabor crashed on its first and only flight.
It crashed? Aw, this does not bode well for us, guys.
The module takes place in some sort of alternate timeline, where the Tabor continued on, moving from being a bomber to a passenger plane in the days after the Great War, and keepers get a floor plan for it. Now, a couple things with this adventure. First, it's not really a mystery investigation. Instead, it's more of a series of events that occur around and to the investigators. In fact, this scenario is definitely more about the journey than the destination. It can be inserted into an existing campaign at some point where the investigators might have to fly a long distance. So if they need to travel across the United States or Europe or Africa, because then they're in the middle of a different adventure, instead of just doing a fast-forward redlining like you would have in an Indiana Jones movie, the players have an adventure along the way. Next, this is more of a high roleplay scenario where the keeper is going to be running 8 or more NPCs, and for many of them, the players are actually going to have to instigate a lot of their interactions with them. That can make it very difficult for some game masters to run. Having a full cast might not meet everybody's taste as far as how much roleplay they want to have in a game, and this is also not a high combat scenario. Finally, while the adventure is perfectly suitable for new investigators, in fact, I think it's actually a really good scenario to start off where maybe the characters are introduced to the mythos and introduced to each other. There is one subplot in there that's designed for experienced characters, or at least one experienced character that might have some sort of mythos relation in their background. However, that's just a subplot for this adventure, and if your group has no experienced investigators, you can simply remove or alter that portion of the adventure altogether. In fact, many of the elements in this entire scenario can be altered to suit your particular game. So that's what we're going to talk about in this review. My suggestions, my tips, and my criticisms that I have as a game master who has successfully run this adventure.
And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm really just along for the ride on this one. And the free peanuts. There are free peanuts on this flight, right?
But before we can go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here, but send your game master this way to see about running this adventure for you. Alrighty, Game Masters, let's get this thing started. As I said, the scenario is more of a journey that takes place between missions. The flight takes at least 2 days, which isn't that difficult when you're looking at 1920s air travel, which is a lot slower than air travel is now. Not just the fact that we didn't have jets back then, but they also didn't have radar, and flying at night was considered, usually too risky for commercial air travel. And many flight paths just followed landmarks, such as they would follow along a railroad track or follow along a highway, or simply the pilot would just kind of look at certain distant landmarks and just kind of fly toward them, bouncing back and forth, like, I'm going to go towards that mountain right there. But because the scenario takes place over multiple days with this flight, you could actually split it up with whatever adventure the player characters are doing is actually somewhere in the middle, such as the player characters get on the plane, they fly for one day to their destination, do whatever it is that they're going to do, and then fly back a day or two later. However, you're going to have most of the same NPCs on the flight, which means it's a little bit trickier to pull off in a believable way, but it is definitely possible. Keepers will need to be ready to roleplay all the other passengers on the plane, and that's really going to be the most difficult part of the scenario, is all the NPCs that the keeper has to keep track of and portray. 3 of those characters are the flight crew, the pilot, the co-pilot, and the engineer. One of the passengers is a German industrialist, Gerhard Stumpf, who's an all-around evil guy. He's also armed with a Luger because all evil Germans are required to carry Lugers. This is a law. He's on the plane with an American businessman, Ed Gillespie, who's working out a secret deal with Gerhard in order to sell the Germans some helium despite the embargoes against that. So this guy's essentially selling out his country to sell some helium off to this evil German. Next we had Alfred Clark, who says that he's a banker on vacation, but in truth, Clark is a serpent person who's studying Gerhard because he's planning on killing the German and impersonating him to take control of his factories, which he can then use to make chemical weapons to wipe out humanity.
Holy crap, did you just say serpent person? That means I get to say it, right?
Not yet. Next we have Arthur Malo, a shady private investigator who's following the player characters, or at least one of the player characters, in regards to some incident from their past. He's kind of your wild card NPC, and keepers can delete him from the scenario if they like, but I also like him as a nice reminder to the player characters, that their actions can have echoes that chase them down later. So if they have an adventure in some town and certain things happen, then that's actually what started getting this private investigator on, following them up, or whoever's hiring him to follow them around and see what they're up to. Also, Malo is armed with a pistol, which is something you're going to want to know because once the combat starts, you're going to want to know who's got some guns. Finally, we have Dawn Peachtree, a Hollywood starlet, who's most likely going to fall in love with one of the player characters. She is a very colorful and very fun NPC.
Oh, fall in love with one of us, huh? Well, it just so happens that this character is available.
Using the seating chart, the keepers get to assign which seats the players have. Old aircraft like this, the seating was done by weight to keep the plane balanced, so before they get in, they all get weighed, which means that everybody has to announce what their size stat is. And then taking that into account with the weight of all the cargo and the luggage and everything like that, the airline assigns where everybody sits. Of course, if you don't have enough players to fill the remaining seats, the module gives us a few possible NPCs to drop in as filler, sort of mask which of the NPCs are the important ones. The setup before the flight is extremely detailed, explaining how air travel used to work, kind of introducing all the NPCs. Now during the flight itself, the players should be asked what it is that they're doing, and there possibly might need to be some rolls made, to notice Gerhard and Gillespie, whispering their business back and forth, while Clark is in the back, very keenly observing Gerhard, trying to get all his mannerisms down, while Malo is behind the player characters, watching them, trying to see what they're up to. Now, whoever's sitting next to Dawn is going to get all the attention they need because she's going to be talking their ear off. Nothing really kicks off till the end of the first day flight when a plane hits a flock of birds, damaging the plane and injuring the 2 pilots. And the player character is going to be asked to kind of jump up to the front and help them out, do first aid, try to take the stick and keep the plane from crashing. Maybe somebody might have to go out on the wing to help the engineer try to fix one of the engines because it's stalled out because it's full of bird guts. Now, one criticism that I do have about this scenario is the module suggests that this was caused by a flying polyp that frightened the birds, and I find that just a bit strange. Birds don't need a supernatural reason to collide with a plane, just ask Captain Sully. Now after this, the player characters are put up for a hotel in the night. And again, the keepers are going to have to roleplay out the dinner and what happens after dinner as the player characters interact with the various NPCs, especially Dawn, who's going to be pretending that she's getting drunk and throwing herself with this player character that she now considers a hero for saving their lives. Now Clark, if they pay attention to him, is noticeably not eating. And then that night, Clark is going to sneak out, find a dog, kill it, and eat it because he's a serpent person and he likes raw meat. Now, however, once he's out, he gets kind of turned around and he returns to the hotel and he goes into the wrong room, ending up being one of the player character's rooms. If the player character fails their listen roll, that means that they don't hear Clark crossing the room and they wake up the next morning to find some muddy footprints going across their carpet and a smudge of blood on their door handle. Definitely weird and definitely enough to tip the players off that something is going on.
Going on? I'll tell you what's going on around here. Dirty carpets, bloody handprints on the door handles. This place is about to get a scathing Yelp review from me.
However, if the player character does succeed their listen roll, that means that they wake up and then Clark attacks them. Initially, he's going to try to cast a Mesmerized spell on them to put them back to sleep and to forget what they just saw. Now, in 7th edition, Mesmerize is an alternate name for the spell Mental Suggestion, but that takes 3 rounds to cast, and that is a pretty long time when you're looking at combat rounds, especially since this spell is suggested to be used at the very end during the climax of the scenario. So my suggestion here is to combine this spell with the Voorish sign, which he also has, and use that to speed this casting time up to 1 round. Or you could say that he is a deeper version of this spell, which is a lot faster. Or you could just simply give him Cloud Memory, which I think is more of what this module's trying to do with the spell. Now, if the investigator makes their POW save against this spell and they don't succumb to the magic of it, Clark is then going to physically attack them. Now, being the fact that he's a freaking serpent person and the investigator is going to be unarmed and unarmored, presumably, because they were asleep in bed, that means the investigator is most likely going to die in this combat. So if Clark kills the player character, which is the most likely result, he's going to stage a faked robbery and then he's going to leave out the window. And the next morning, the rest of the group is going to wake up, find out that their buddy is dead while everybody else is trying to get back aboard the airplane.
Gee whiz, it looks like somebody killed our buddy and fled out that window over there. So our choices are really we could investigate our friend's murder and miss our flight, or we can just kind of shrug this one off and get back aboard the airplane.
So if the rest of the player characters stick around to find out who killed their buddy, then they're going to, of course, miss the flight, and a few days later they're going to read in the newspaper about how that plane went down, and they're never ever going to find out what happened because the killer got away and they didn't know that at the time, and that's not really a fulfilling end to the scenario. Or if the Woken investigator somehow manages to kill the serpent person that jumps on them while they're in bed, then it's all going to be like, oh, hey, that guy that we were traveling with just happened to be a monster, and then nobody's going to learn any more about it. It says that the venom, the serpent person's venom, breaks down his body, so it ends up dissolving, taking away any proof that there was ever a serpent person there instead of just a nasty puddle of goo. And that really just doesn't make a fulfilling end to the scenario either, because then they don't learn anything else and they don't really have much other than one of the player characters got attacked in the night. So whether they kill the monster or the monster kills one of the investigators, I don't really see either of those being that satisfying or that fun for anybody that's around the table. So here's my suggestion. If the sleeping character wakes up in the middle of the night, and if they make their POW save against this spell, instead of having it where they completely are immune to it, they still fall asleep, and they vaguely remember some glowing eyes or something like that, some sort of half-remembered dream, and then they find the footprints across the floor, and then they see the bloody handprint that's on the door handle, but that is it, and it gives them something that they have to investigate. But if the player character fails this POW roll, they still fall asleep, but now they're under the mental control of the serpent person, and the player and the player character are unaware of that yet, and that can then be revealed in the big climax to the scenario. It's a pretty big change to the scenario, but I feel it makes for a big improvement for it, and also a really good twist that everybody's going to remember. Okay, so on day 2 of the flight, nothing really much happens for the first portion of it. They do have a lunchtime stop, and a cameraman snaps a picture of everybody because they're wanting to get a photograph of Dawn, and it ends up that Clark was caught in this picture, and Clark, worried that the photograph is going to reveal that he's really a serpent person, murders this guy and then breaks his camera. It's an interesting scene, it's no big deal, but the point that it brings up, the reason I'm even mentioning it in this review, is because would a photograph reveal a serpent person's true identity underneath the spell? And I don't know. And maybe Clark doesn't know either, he's just not wanting to risk it. Personally, I don't think that it would reveal that there's a serpent person in a human disguise. I think maybe the flash, if it casts a shadow up on the wall, that would reveal the serpent person. But I don't think the actual photograph itself would show what he really was. But it is kind of an interesting thing to think about, and it's something that keepers might want to consider if they're going to be using serpent people in different Call of Cthulhu adventures or anything like that. Just a little food for thought. The adventure climax happens after they take off again. Now, during the flight, the engineer is kind of going through the cabin and he's filling up everybody's cup with steaming coffee that he has in a thermos. And then the plane hits some turbulence or whatnot, and he ends up spilling scalding hot coffee on top of Clark. Now, this coffee is evidently McDonald's hot because it not only burns enough that it gets through his 1 point of armor, but then it causes a point of damage to him, which, destroys his illusion and reveals what he really is to everybody aboard the plane. Now, my favorite part of all this is Clark has no idea that the illusion has been destroyed. He's just sitting there in a chair, dabbing hot coffee off of himself and calling this guy an idiot. And it's only when everybody else in the plane suddenly starts reacting to the fact that there's a monster sitting in one of the chairs that he's kind of like, whoops, well, looks like I gotta kill everybody to keep my secret.
Can I say it now?
You can say it now.
Oh, finally. Okay, hold on. I am sick of all these serpent people on this airplane.
Now, keepers, prior to the scene, you need to know if any of the player characters are armed. Weapons on planes really weren't that regulated at the time, but the question really is, do the PCs have their guns on them, or are they loaded in their luggage, kind of like Indiana Jones and where he keeps his revolver in his suitcase? Next, 2 of the NPCs have guns. So what is it they do here? Do they go insane with bouts of madness and start shooting at everybody, thinking that everybody might be a serpent person too? Or do they start shooting wildly but miss, and now they're going to be hitting NPCs and the player characters have to dodge all these shots that are going around? Or maybe they're punching holes in the airplane and now the airplane's getting damaged for it. Now the plane is shaking around as people are trying to scramble and the airplane's getting off balance. Have fun with this and make sure that this is an added threat too, that you've got these 2 other people that are armed and the player characters aren't in control of where those guns are going to start firing. Also, if one of the player characters got put under Clark's spell, as I mentioned possibly doing earlier, this is a great time for that reveal to take place as, the serpent person, looks at one of the PCs and is all like, protect me. And now the player character, draws their weapon and points at one of the other PCs to their own surprise as well. Several things might happen during the course of this combat. He might grab Dawn Peachtree and, use her as a hostage or a human shield, or he might, try to climb out on the wing of the plane and start disabling one of the engines and grab one of the parachutes and jump off to safety as the plane crashes. Keepers, once again, have fun with this. NPCs should be scrambling around and getting in the way or suffering their own bouts of madness. The plane might start going down because the pilot's going through a bout of madness, or the pilot might, be trying to get away or trying to attack the serpent person. And now the PCs, one of them has to get up to the front and grab the stick and pull the ship up to keep it from crashing. Once again, make this cinematic. One of my favorite options here is if Clark gets out on the wing to disable one of the engines and he dies, he can get pulled off the wing of the plane and caught up in one of the rear-facing props and just diced up like a Nazi in an Indiana Jones movie.
Wow, 3 Indiana Jones references in a single video? I think that one's a new record for you.
Once the serpent person is dead, that's pretty much the end of the adventure. Once again, his venom breaks down his body in a short time, so by the time they land, all the evidence that there was a monster on board is completely lost. The players get off the plane and they get back to whatever their regular adventure was. However, I also suggest that you add a little bit more here. You maybe have something that's in Clark's suitcase if they decide to go through his luggage. Maybe a tablet or a journal or something that's written to a serpent person language. Maybe there's photos of Gerhard Stump because he was trying to follow him and kind of learn all his mannerisms. Maybe there's a big map with weird symbols drawn on it. The player characters don't know what's at all those different locations. Give them something that might not be immediately apparent to being a new adventure or answer all their questions about what just happened to them, but something they can research and something they can gain some information from, maybe a little bit of mythos, maybe lose a bit of sanity as well. Another thing that this scenario might need, depending on how you incorporate into your own campaign, is some sort of mission as well, something that they're doing on this flight. Now, one that the module suggests is that the player characters are really there to be bodyguards for Dawn Peachtree, though she might not be aware that they're there to be her bodyguards. Like maybe some threatening letters arrived, and now the player characters are watching all the other passengers aboard the plane because they're trying to figure out, whoever it is might be sending these letters might be on the plane with them. Or maybe Dawn picked up some jewelry at an auction or something like that, and the player characters think that it might be mythos related. So there they are, they're trying to maybe steal these jewelry, or maybe they're trying to determine if it's mythos related or not. So now they're there trying to get a hold of something that she has. The co-pilot is said to have some mythos experience in his backstory going back to the Great War, so maybe the player characters are aboard the plane because they're trying to get close to the co-pilot and learn a little bit about his experience because there might be information that he has that can help them out with their main adventure.
Essentially give your player characters some sort of job or mission to do while they're on the flight. Some sort of mystery or person of interest that they can focus their attention to, the whole time never suspecting that there's a monster in the seat behind them.
Also, the private detective Malo, what does he learn about the player characters during the course of this adventure? Does seeing them fight some sort of inhuman monster make him a sympathetic character toward them? And also, who's hired Malo? Who's pulling the strings behind him? Keepers can kind of pull it off to where maybe Malo shows up in future adventures, occasionally just in the background, and they start seeing him other places. Or maybe he's just going to be the first of several investigators that some sort of shadowy figure in the back is going to be sending after the PCs and gathering more and more information about them. Overall, I really do enjoy this adventure, but as long as it's used as a piece in a larger game, such as they're actively traveling somewhere to have their adventure and that's when you drop it in, or if you use this as the beginning of a much larger campaign, like, how all the player characters met was they took this flight together and fought a serpent person. But using this as just a standalone one-shot adventure, it doesn't really work that well. Now, one tie-in that you could do is if you're planning on running the Two-Headed Serpent campaign. And with that, you could say that the serpent person is affiliated with one of the factions from the Two-Headed Serpent. And because the investigators' experience that they had with this, that's how they get recruited by Caduceus. Finally, one thing that people have asked about in different online communities is Clark's stats. There are doubles for some of his stats, and people wonder if his stats change between forms. They don't. For example, his strength is always 16, but in his human disguise it makes it look like it should be 12. And these differences are ways that keen investigators might be able to notice that he's not exactly what he appears to be. So while Clark might act like his intelligence is only 11, it's really 23. He doesn't actually get dumber once he enters his human form, it's merely a disguise. Sort of like when they did that deepfake of Tom Selleck into the Indiana Jones movies. Don't let that sweet mustache fool you. That's still Harrison Ford under Tom's skin.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews and how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day. Having Dawn Peachtree fall in love with me is amazing. There's some serious perks to having a Hollywood movie star girlfriend. 1, she is loaded. 2, she is a hell of a lot of fun. But the paparazzi, man, they are driving me crazy. They gave us one of those Hollywood movie star names for celebrity couples, and now they call us Jackdaw, which I think is a kind of bird or something like that. I don't know, but it is really freaking annoying.